Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for the X Files Miniseries Episode 4, Home Again. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of the X Files Miniseries, so I'll have to give a spoiler warning for Episode 4. If you have not seen this episode, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things may be spoiled for you. So, Home Again was a tough one to pin down. If I'm being honest here, there were moments in this episode where I thought it was absolutely brilliant, and moments in this episode where I thought it was absolute shit. But all in all, I think I have to call it a good effort, but I don't think it quite comes together the way it was intended to. So it seems to me that this miniseries that is only 6 episodes long is trying to represent each of the archetypes of X-Files episodes that had existed in the past. Episode 1 was the mythology episode about aliens and government conspiracies. Episode 2 was the emotional artsy episode that explored the characters of Mulder and Scully more. And episode 3 was the typical comedy episode that brings the laughs. So I was quite curious as to where they were going to take episode 4, and it seems to be the typical monster murder mystery where it's treated almost like a cop show with Mulder and Scully trying to solve a murder, except the murderer is a monster. And typically the monster gets away, although sometimes they catch him, but in this case not. Although there was a side plot with Scully's mother dying and this making her think about her son that she abandoned. So let me get into that first, because frankly I thought this was the stronger aspect of the episode. If you haven't noticed from my prior reviews, I tend to gravitate more towards character stories, and part of my criticism of the X-Files series as a whole was I thought the characters of Mulder and Scully didn't come off that strongly. However, I am singly impressed with the miniseries, as so far all the episodes, even the comedy one, did a great job of presenting Mulder and Scully as strong, well-rounded characters. In my opinion, a better job than the main series did overall. However, if I'm being honest, I felt Scully and Mulder's regrets of abandoning their son that they put up for adoption was handled much better in episode 2. However, an interesting side note is that episode 2, Founder's Mutation, was originally intended to be episode 5, and you can kind of tell in last week's episode, Mulder and Scully Meet the Weremonster, that that episode was meant to be episode 2, and it makes more sense in that regard for Mulder's character arc. But that would also mean that this was meant to be the first mention of Scully's son William, and not the second. I'm not sure if that makes a big difference either way. Other than watching this episode, it felt like they were just rehashing what they had already covered in episode 2. However, if it were reversed, I don't think Founder's Mutation would feel like a rehash of this episode, as it goes into much more detail of how Mulder and Scully feel about their abandoned son. So ultimately, I do think it was a mistake for them to move the episodes around like this after they had already filmed them. I think I heard somewhere that it was showrunner Chris Carter's decision to do this, but I'm not entirely certain, and besides, he could have been pressured by the network to do so. I'm not sure. Either way, the Williams storyline in this episode didn't come off as strongly to me. However, what I do think came off strongly was Scully dealing with her mother dying. I felt this was a really emotionally powerful, and I think they dealt with what effect this would have on Scully very well. About how she just wanted to go back to work so she wouldn't have to deal with it anymore. And when she was listening to the artist's strange story about art monsters, she was much more receptive to hearing it because it tied into what she was thinking about, and she was in such a weakened emotional state. I thought that played out brilliantly with the flashbacks that they inserted. I also like how this episode brought Mulder and Scully closer together, and they were behaving more like a couple than they had in the previous 3 episodes, or at least really close friends, as Mulder tried to comfort Scully in dealing with her loss. And I like the callbacks to the original series where Mulder sat by Scully's bed when she was dying of cancer. That was a really nice touch. However, the storyline with her mother saying some weird shit and asking for a strange son, I felt that it was a bit too similar to plot devices that the show has used in the past. Plus, one of the issues I had with the main series is that I thought they went a little kill crazy with Mulder and Scully's family, as they killed off Mulder's mother and father and Scully's father and sister, so this kind of felt more like the same in that regard. I'm not sure why they just can't leave their families alone. I'm glad I'm not related to them. So let's talk about the A story with the trash monster, or the art monster, or the trash art monster, whatever you want to call it. I was severely less impressed with this story, as I was never a fan of these monster murder mystery episodes, and typically these kind of episodes were among my least favorite type of episodes of the X Files, as they had a tendency to come off as cheesy B-grade horror films. However, I will say that I was much more impressed with the way it was handled in this episode than in the main series. The style and the way it was shot and edited together was a vast improvement and made me appreciate it a lot more. I'm sure this had something to do with they only had 6 episodes to make as opposed to 24, and they could spend a lot more time on the craft than they could in the 90s, and to me it didn't have that B-grade quality that some of these 90s episodes did. That being said, the story was a bit silly. I mean, a painting going around killing people because the artist put bad intentions into it? Come on. And the scenes where it showed the monster stalking its prey, I know it was meant to be suspenseful, but I didn't really find it suspenseful at all because it was just too cliched, too obvious what was going to happen. But then again, I'm not a fan of horror at all, so that might have something to do with it. So my rating for Home Again is a 6 good. I almost gave this episode a 7 because I love the emotional scenes with Scully dealing with her mother's death and abandoning her child, and the episode was shot and edited beautifully, but overall the story was a bit of a mess, so I think I have to bring it down to a 6. The art monster story was really uninspired and unoriginal, and I felt they didn't always do the best job of blending these two stories, so at times both felt a bit rushed. So that's it for my review of Home Again. Be sure to check back here every week as I review the remaining 2 episodes of the X Files miniseries, and be sure to check out my channel next week, as it's a big week, as Better Call Saul, The Walking Dead, and Vikings are all returning, and I'll be doing individual episode reviews for all of them. And if you're into Game of Thrones, I have tons of videos on that as well, and will continue to release at least one video on Game of Thrones a week, so make sure you subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.